Hi guys. So in my last video, I told you that I was going to go to a funeral director's. Had an appointment to go and discuss some planning and arrangements, basically. And I just really wanted to do a video just to say kind of what the experience was like and kind of what was talked about, just in case anyone else wants to go down sort of a similar route to myself and kind of have quite an input in that and what you want. I guess my main reason for doing that, as I said, is just to try and make it a bit easier if I can, for my family and everyone when it happens, because it's going to be obviously a very difficult time. And I think to try and arrange a funeral as well, especially now I've actually realised how much is involved in it and actually how many questions there are, and how much you need to think about. Obviously it's not for everyone, so I totally understand that. And like I said before, obviously I'm not doing this because like I've been told any like really bad news or anything like that. But I just want to know that it's done, so that if things do go badly, sooner rather than later, then I know that it's kind of all, as much as it can be, it's kind of everyone's going to know what I wanted. So I guess the first thing I want to say is that I've been to two different funeral directors, and I actually had really different experiences in each. So it might sound strange to say to go to more than one place, but I definitely think if you are going to take the route that I am and be actively involved in the planning of your own funeral, then I would definitely recommend going to more than one place, just to really get a feel for the people there and how the business is run, because obviously they're the people that are going to be there to actually help your family members at that point in time. So it's important to have people that you think are going to be suitable, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word, but people that are going to be the right kind of people that you would want to be sitting down with your family at that time. There was absolutely nothing wrong with either funeral directors I went to, really, but I think partly the first one I went to was part of I don't know what you would call it really. I don't want to obviously say any names, but like a franchise of a much bigger company. I don't know if that makes sense. And the main thing I really want to say, to be fair, is that the first one I didn't make an appointment, and I literally just walked in with Anthony and just asked for some information, basically. It's something that I've been meaning to do for quite a while, and it just kind of, I just sort of had that moment where I kind of got up the courage, I suppose, to go in there. And I'll just say there was nothing wrong with it, but it was more, I don't know. I think probably when I went to the second one, that's when I realised how different it was. Because the second one I went to was much more of a family-run funeral directors, it seemed. And it really felt that way. So like it felt a lot more personal. I can't really put my finger on like how, but for me, I did make an appointment. So I ran off and made an appointment, and to be fair to the lady, I did actually tell her of the situation before I went there, because again, I think partly the first place I went to, when I kind of just walked in out of the blue and said, oh, it's about me, like planning my own funeral, I think it probably did throw the poor woman a little bit, and took her a bit off guard. So I did tell the lady when I actually booked the appointment what it was for. So maybe that helped as well, I'm not sure. But in terms of what actually happens when you go there, and what my experience was, is basically you sit down in a very relaxed environment, and basically go through like what um, the main points to cover are in terms of planning a funeral. And obviously a big part of it is talking about the costs. And really I want to deal with those two things quite separately, because for me the main important thing was obviously what's going to be involved in it, and the planning. Obviously cost is still important, but less so for me right now in terms of why I'm doing this. I'll put the sort of money side of it aside for now, and maybe talk about that a little bit at the end. So basically, the very first thing, which they're going to ask you is about whether you want to be buried or cremated. So really, that is the very first and probably the most important decision to make. Now, if you've got a will, I know a lot of people have that written into their will. So there's like a bare minimum sort of thing. People know at least if the person wants to be buried or cremated. There's going to be loads of reasons why people choose one or the other, and that's going to be completely personal. I'll talk a little bit about the differences as far as I'm aware, but basically because I'm Roman Catholic, I looked into it a bit more because my initial reaction was to be cremated, and I actually looked into something called a bio urn, which is like a biodegradable urn which you can plant in the ground, with like a sapling on it, so that like a tree grows there, or like where you can have different plants. You can look it up online. Obviously you need to find permissions for that sort of thing. You can't just go and put it anywhere. So you might need to get in touch with local councils and things like that in terms of where you want to do that. And I'm pretty sure in terms of just scattering ashes as well, you do have to actually look into a little bit of where you're going to be, where you want to do that, and if there's any like permissions needed or anything like that. So initially, as I say, I was thinking cremation, but then I looked into it a bit more, and I read some things online, and spoke to some people about it. And being Roman Catholic doesn't mean that you can't be cremated. That changed quite a few years ago, where they actually said that they would, like, that is allowable in terms of the church. But from what I've understood, the preference is still a burial. I'm not going to go into massive detail about why that is, because obviously that's another subject. And that's obviously to do with my religious beliefs, which I completely understand that like lots of people who maybe are watching this are not going to have. So it's probably not going to be relevant to them. So the very first thing they ask you is that. So the major difference is really that, as I say, what I've already mentioned in terms of permissions and where to scatter ashes and things like that. But also with a burial, one of the things that we discussed was about what actually happens, like what actually physically happens when you pass away, in terms of like your body and things like that. So the two options that we discussed were, obviously it depends where you are in terms of, okay, if I'm going to be in the hospice, or if it happens in the hospital, or if I'm going to be at home. Because that is something that our hospice has spoken to me about. What would be my preference? Would I want to be at home, or would I want to be in the hospice? So if it happens at home, basically your friends or your family members who are with you would need to call the GP first, before anything else, because GP has to come and actually like confirm the death, basically. That's not the registering of the death, that's something separate. but the GP has to actually come and confirm the death before the funeral directors can come and actually take your body away. Now, if you're in a hospice, then obviously going to have doctors in the hospice already that would do that, and the hospice may have more facilities to actually keep you there for a little while, rather than obviously if you're at home, you would leave home pretty much straight away. So the funeral director said obviously any time it happens, if it's in the middle of the night, the funeral directors will have a line that you can call 24/7, and they will come and collect you from there. So again, that's a few things to kind of think about if you're in my kind of situation, is thinking about where your preference would be in terms of where you want to be. Obviously, no one knows really what the end's going to look like, so it may be a case that you get into a position where you don't really have that much of a choice, and you've ended up somewhere because of your illness, and that's where ultimately things finish. But that's not always the case, so it's good to have a preference and for people to know what that is. So that would be the very first thing to happen. So the GP comes, and then the funeral director comes to come and actually take your body away. So after that, someone who's either I think there's rules around it, but basically normally a family member will need to actually go and register the death, and that's done it depends on your local area, but it would actually need to go and be done. So it's not like someone's going to come to your house or something that you can just do online or something like that. As far as I've understood it, you need to actually go to the place and register death and get formal paperwork and things like that before anything else can proceed. And that needs to be done relatively quickly as well, in terms of how long after the death. I think it's actually within like a few days or something. So that's something to maybe prepare people for as well, is knowing that they're going to need to do that. So we talked about that. And then obviously it's about options in terms of, for me, it's kind of what type of service you're going to want. So for me, obviously I'm going to want a mass in church. So what would basically happen on the day is that funeral cars would come to collect family from my home, most likely. So immediate family, like my husband, my mum and dad, my brother and things like that, would go in a car, be collected by the funeral directors and go in a car to the church. And again, because I'm looking at a church funeral, you can have the option of actually having your body in the house the night before, and then the funeral director collects the body and puts it into the hearse, and then everyone goes together to wherever you're having a ceremony. Or in my case, what's most likely to happen is that my body, in the coffin and everything, all sort of prepared, ready for the funeral, would be taken to the church the night before, so that the coffin and everything would be in the church. And then, say, the car would just pick up the family and the members and take them to the church where everyone would meet. So thinking about the service itself, things to think about there is what kind of music you're going to want to have. I did think about that quite a while ago, and it's not a long list, but I made a little list of songs which, I don't know how to describe it, but songs that have just like, every time I hear them, just like really get me. I'm sure everyone's got songs like that, that they've heard throughout their life, and it's not something probably you can just think about on the spot. It's something that probably over time you'll think back to different times with different songs and just note them down. I just noted them in my phone. If you're having a church ceremony, obviously you're going to be thinking about hymns as well, what kind of hymns you want, and whether you want to have a choir present. Most churches offer that. And even if you're not having a church ceremony, it's thinking about readings as well. and who you want to actually speak and say something at your funeral. Again, it might be helpful if you perhaps if you speak to people. Again, if you're in my situation, which is a little bit unique, you could actually speak to people beforehand. And if you really, really wanted to, you could actually help that person, if they did want to do that, and actually work on something together. That's a bit of a novel idea, and again, it's not going to be for everyone. The alternative option as well, which is sort of something that I've thought about, is like I'm doing right now. I don't really know if it's an option in church, but is to actually do something yourself. I'm sure other people have probably done that before. Doesn't necessarily have to be a video recording, it could just be you talking. But again, if you feel that's right for you, and it's, again, all of this is very personal. If you feel like your friends or your family or the people that you're going to be at your funeral, you don't want them to speak, or not that you don't want them to speak, but you don't want them to have to speak and feel like they have to, because obviously it's quite hard, very hard to do, then maybe that could be another way of approaching it. Again, I haven't really made any decisions about that yet, but obviously having this meeting, I'm starting to think about these different things. And then in my case of a burial, then after the church ceremony is over, the funeral itself, then the hearse and the car, and then obviously everyone else who's there would follow to where you're actually going to be buried. Now when you're being buried, obviously what you're going to need to do is actually again arrange where you're going to be buried. And you have to purchase a grave plot. Now, even if you're being cremated, you can actually have your ashes buried, which again is another option. So if you want to be cremated, but then you want to actually have a burial or be at a specific burial site, then that is an option as well. Now, one of the things I'm just going to talk about in terms of burial is something that like really threw me off when I looked it up online myself at my local crematorium. Is when I started looking, it had like a price list. It's basically talking about the costs of having a grave and things. And two things it talked about, I can't remember what the wording was, but it was like whether you have a single, a double, or a triple grave kind of thing. Which kind of makes sense to me in terms of, okay, I know people, sometimes they get buried and then they want their husband or their wife to be buried in the same place and that sort of thing. But then the other thing that it said about was like, it's almost like a lease, if you like. And it was like, the cost went up depending if you want 30, 50 or 99 years. And I was thinking to myself, like, after 30 years, are they going to dig me up and make space for someone else? What the hell? That is not what that means. You're never going to, that's not the case of where they're actually going to take you back up out of the ground. Basically what it means is it is basically like a lease. But the way the funeral directors explained it to me is basically, whatever period of time that you, say you chose the 30-year option, if in 30 years time there is no more space left in the crematorium or the graveyard where you're buried, then they will look at those spaces above you. So like I said earlier, if you've got like a double, triple grave, whatever, because obviously there'll be records of everything, so they'll know exactly how the cemetery is actually planned out, if you like. So basically what will happen is they will look to actually put or use that same plot, if you like, to put someone else if there's no space. So the way that it would work is if it's 30 years, and for 30 years no one would be able to do that in terms of your grave, past the 30 years, basically what that looks like, if it is the case that the graveyard is then full, it then goes in like a date order, if you like. So the oldest graves are used first, if that makes sense. So the way the funeral director put it is, like, basically it's highly unlikely to happen in our lifetime, in a sense of like, if people are visiting your grave or whatever, even if that was to happen and the cemetery was to get full, because it goes into like that date order, then there's going to be graves that are obviously a lot older than yours, where that would happen first. So it's unlikely to happen in a stage where your relatives are going to be visiting your grave. So she kind of put my mind at rest, because that was, I couldn't really understand what that was all about. And obviously it's not really something you would look into under normal circumstances. So that, I hope I've explained that properly. But if you do see that, that's basically what that means. So one of the next steps that I need to take is I actually need to go and visit the local crematorium, which the funeral directors told me about. And basically look to purchase a plot. I'll probably have to make a separate video, because obviously I don't know how that will pan out until I've actually been there. So that's one thing that I do need to do. So already you've got, okay, funeral directors, which talk you through a lot of things and help with a lot of, well, the majority of what needs to be done. But already we've got that, but then you've got things like registering the death, which is another separate trip. And then you've got things like, if you want to be buried, or I suppose even if you want to be cremated, it's looking at the place where that's going to happen, and getting all the agreements and everything necessary to do that. So that's already 3 different things, or 3 different trips, if you like. So it just kind of shows that it's kind of probably a bit more complicated. If you've planned a funeral before, then this is probably all you've done and heard all this before. But this video is more for people like myself, which never got involved in planning a funeral. I've hardly ever even been to a funeral. So one thing that was discussed in terms of like the burial and things like that, and one thing we actually looked at, the funeral directors, which I didn't even know existed. I knew there was different types of coffins that you could have. I don't know a great deal about it, but I was pretty sure there's going to be different ones. But what was in my head, I kind of just thought of the like traditional wood coffin, really, but maybe in different colours of wood or something. Now, when we actually came up during the meeting, she showed us these pictures where basically you can get a coffin but have it wrapped. You know, like if you have your car wrapped with, I don't know, like not just a colour, but like if you see people's cars that have like advertising on, stuff like that. Basically you can get a coffin with like, and there was so many different ones, like photographs or a design basically that wraps around the whole coffin, which is something that never even entered my head. And as I say, there was all the different things you could imagine. I mean, there was even like a snakeskin one, which is not really for me, but it went from everything from like that all the way through to like flowers and butterflies and kind of everything in between. And she actually said to us that she'd had someone else who, the person who passed away was a tattoo artist, and actually what their family did was got the coffin wrapped with all different designs, his tattoo designs. So obviously it can be personalised as well. So that's something that I didn't know about. And some of them are really beautiful, actually, I do have to say. So again, I don't know if that's something that everyone offers. It might not be. But again, maybe something you could look into. The other option that we discussed a little bit, which probably wasn't, we didn't discuss it loads because it was more for a cremation than a burial. It's kind of like the eco version, if you like. It's kind of is a wicker yeah, like a wicker one basically. I guess for obvious reasons, they don't really recommend that for burial when it's going to be moved around and things like that. But yeah, I mean, that's something that some people out there might prefer. I've heard quite a lot of times people saying about, if you're, especially if you're going to be cremated, about saying, well, there's no point in spending like loads of money on a coffin that's going to just go in the ground or be burned, which can make sense. Again, opinions will differ. But yeah, that was the other sort of option that came up, and obviously you did have the traditional looking ones as well. And also, if you're going to be cremated, then obviously you're looking at urns and things like that. And they did actually have it was basically exactly the same thing, except obviously it's a small box to put ashes in. But those could be wrapped with designs and pictures as well. So, or it could be traditional. There are things in there which I didn't personally discuss, but I could see they had the options because I had some sort of leaflets and things around in the funeral directors of if you're getting cremated, is using the ashes in jewelry and things like that. I mean, to be honest, if you look online, there's so many like different things that are available out there now. Obviously, a big part of that will be about kind of your beliefs. So obviously, how you're finally laid to rest is very much going to be in line whatever your beliefs are or your religion is, or if you don't have any religion, that's all going to have an impact in terms of what you want your funeral to look like. So there's literally, if you start looking online, option for every single kind of type of person, every thought and belief out there. So that's something that I'm sure you can discuss with funeral directors as well, if that's something that you would be interested in. So again, moving past that, we're basically looking at, again, for my situation with a burial, if you wanted to be looking at a headstone and things like that, that's not something I've looked at yet because I feel like there's quite a lot of other things that I need to sort out and plan before I get to that stage, that are probably more important than what my headstone would look like, and what I'd want on it, because I just feel like that's probably something that, something that my family could probably, it's not like a really hard thing probably to do as such. The other thing for me was, in terms of the service, it's looking at the actual order of service. So, again, those are sort of like leaflets that will be made up. It's a bit like when you get married, really. You have your sort of order of service for people to follow, and choosing pictures for that, and choosing what you want to be written in there. I mean, the example that was given to me had quite a few pictures, and then on the back it had sort of a message to obviously everyone who's attended the funeral, sort of thank you for attending and things like that. And the funeral directors did say, if you can tailor that quite a bit. And she was saying, even if you wanted to have like a centre page that was just full of pictures, you could do that if you wanted to. So there's quite a few options there to think about. So it's another thing to kind of make decisions on. What photographs you would like to be used. The other option in terms of photographs is whether you want to actually have a photograph of yourself in the service. So, like a large sort of blown up picture, if you like, not huge, but a blown up sort of portrait picture to be displayed sort of next to your coffin. Again, that's optional. You don't have to have it. The only thing I would say about that if you are going to look into that yourself and you're going to be looking at photographs for that, just be aware that obviously if it is going to be blown up to like a reasonably big size, it does need to be quite a good quality photo, because otherwise, obviously, once it gets blown up, it's going to be blurry and it's really not going to look very good at all. So you want to make sure that you get a good quality picture for that. I'm just trying to think of anything else that we discussed. Obviously, as we were going through all these things, it's just what I'm sort of looking at now to the side, is sort of jotting down some notes, but also putting down the costs, putting down the costs of each individual thing as you discuss it, so that you've actually got an idea of how much everything's going to cost at the end, because obviously that's money that's going to need to be made available pretty soon, after the actual funeral has taken place. We did ask about funeral plans, and I know that's something that a lot of people might go for. But she actually said to us probably an easier thing to do is actually to just open up an account that your partner or whoever's going to be arranging your funeral has access to, so that it's in that person's name, or joint names, but that person's still going to have access to you after your death, and just put the money aside into that account. It's there immediately available. Again, there's different options, so you could do that, or you could go for like a funeral plan type thing, which places do. So it gives us a really good idea of the costs, because again, I know I said at the beginning that's quite a separate thing, but funerals are not cheap. I think, I don't know if there's statistics or anything, but I think pretty much for like quite a standard funeral that's not like anything amazingly out of the ordinary, you're probably looking at about 5,000 or more. So cost, although it's not the most important thing to me about doing this, is again one of the reasons, because I want to make sure that as much as I can, that money is available at the time, because again, for a lot of people out there, for their family or friends or whoever's organising their funeral, that is a lot of money to find at a very short notice. And again, it's going to be another stress that I'm trying to avoid, basically, for my family and friends and husband and everyone. So, and that's actually just in terms of like what I've discussed so far. Obviously, once the funeral has actually taken place, you're then going to have like, I don't know what you call it actually, like the reception bit afterwards. I don't know if you're supposed to call it that. And that's going to be a whole nother cost. And again, that might not be cheap, especially if you've got a lot of people that are probably going to be coming to your funeral. There are obviously a whole range again of different types of places you can have that, in terms of like you have certain control of the cost. But there is going to be like some sort of cost or some sort of organisation needed for that. So again, that's another thing that needs to be thought about. So beyond that, there is, again, you can look online and I'm sure you can speak to your funeral director about the fact that there's quite a lot of different ways in which you can personalise your funeral as well. I mean, talking about sort of like extra things, so one thing they sort of spoke about when I was there was things like dove release or butterfly release. But I mean, that's just a starting point. I mean, there's loads of different ways. I'm not going to talk specifically about the sorts of things I've thought of, because I don't think this is really the place to do that at this point in time. But yeah, think about how you want to personalise it, because again, if you are going to have this sort of input, then the personalisation of it is the bit that's really going to make the biggest difference, because it's not only that everyone's going to know that they're doing things how you wanted, but also it's making it completely your own, if that makes sense. So all in all, I guess to summarise, yeah, there's a lot more involved basically than I originally thought. And although I've had this meeting with the funeral directors, obviously there's still quite a lot of choices for me to make. and things for me to look into. And I still need to look at, say, going to the crematorium itself and actually thinking about places for the reception afterwards, which the funeral directors did give us a couple of bits of information about local places that they would kind of not necessarily recommend, but that they know of. So yeah, I guess that's kind of given you a little bit of food for thought. I actually felt quite good when I came out as well, because I felt like I'd made a start on doing something that I know, that I definitely know is going to make life easier for everyone left behind when things happen. So I guess if it is something you're considering doing, hopefully this is kind of giving you an idea before you go into it of what to expect. Obviously, it is a very frank discussion. I did feel a little bit bad because even though obviously the lady that we saw, I had told her on the phone the situation that it was for me. There was a couple of times during the meeting that she's kind of like, this is really strange saying this to you about you. But you know, I think when you get to the stage that I'm at as well, kind of like I've said in a few of my other videos, it's something that I think about quite a lot. And I guess the more it's in your head, because in normal life, I think, for me at least, like I never thought about dying. Like you have this whole kind of thing about, I think people's lives are just so busy, you just get so wrapped up in like how your life is going that dying doesn't really enter your head. Whereas obviously in my situation, as I said, I think about it a lot. So for me, I think that does make a huge difference in the fact that I was able to just have a discussion with the funeral directors like I was talking to someone about the weather, really. It didn't really make me emotional. I think maybe for my husband, he could have had a different experience. I haven't actually kind of discussed that with him as such. But for me at least, it was about just getting things organised and knowing more about it and being informed so that I can make the right decisions. So I didn't really struggle with it, and I say to the contrary, I've actually feel a lot better now that I've actually done that, and I know what other things I need to do to have everything, as far as I can, prepared. And I think once I've done that, that's going to actually give me a sort of sense of peace in a way. So even if it doesn't happen for another 30 years, I mean, that would be fantastic, but I know I've done it. So, yeah, I mean, I've been talking for quite a while now. I really hope this is useful. I don't know if it will be, but I really hope this is useful for some people out there. And as I say, if you are kind of on the fence a little bit about how you feel, there's nothing stopping you from going to a funeral. Like with myself, I haven't committed to anything, so you know, there's nothing stopping you from going to funeral directors and discussing these things, and then just going away and just either doing nothing if you feel that that's the right thing for you and you don't want to like pursue looking into that any further, or you could just maybe write some things down and make sure that people know where that is so that they have some idea or some pointers as to what you would have wanted. Or obviously you can do as much as you possibly can in terms of pre-planning, which is kind of the route that I'm going. So I hope that was helpful. And I will speak to you guys soon. Okay, bye.